Thanks, Nick, and thank you everyone for joining. As Nick says, we're going to be talking today about Pearson online school services. I am going to use both the chat and the Q&A functions as we go through this. So if you do have questions that you want me to answer kind of at the end of the session, do use Q&A. The chat might get a bit swamped. I'm going to be asking you a few questions as we go through as well, just to keep everyone engaged. As after all, we are talking about online learning today. So I'm going to cover things in a couple of sections. Starting off with the online schools context, just spending a little bit of time to set the scene before moving into the bulk of the session, which will be specifically on our online school services and what we might be able to do for you to help your school harness the online opportunity. So to get things started and to get you engaged right from the start, we are going to go through the online school context. So I'm going to start with a little bit of history by asking you all to guess, or perhaps you know, but if you don't, to guess, when the first online school was founded. So if you could just go to the chat box and put in the year in which you think the first online school was founded, that would be great. And I'll give you a few moments to do that. So we're getting an excellent range. Got between 2020 and 1981 at the moment in the range. If my history serves me well, I think the internet was invented in the 90s, so the 80s might be pushing it a bit. Okay, so a big range of answers. No one has got the exact year, I don't think, or they possibly have actually. I think I might have seen someone flash up with the year 2000 in there. Yeah, Simon Northcote. Well done. It was indeed the year 2000. And I think that's quite an interesting point to start with, because a lot of people do look at online schools very much as a new thing, something that's been brought about through COVID. But actually, this is something that has been around for over 20 years now, starting in the USA, or at least that is the earliest online school that I'm aware of. Apologies if there is an earlier one somewhere else, but certainly that's still a major school today. 2000 is the starting date for that. And for the United Kingdom, it would be 2005, certainly the earliest that I found here as well. Again, that is a sort of major school still operating today. So going back a good 20 years. And then by the middle of that period, by 2010, those schools are starting to go online. And already by 2015, there are over 500 virtual schools in the USA, bringing us up to over 1 million online school students. And that's full-time online school students pre-COVID. So as you can see, there's a significant kind of original market there, if you like, for online schools. And indeed, if you were to include part-time and hybrid models, that number is sort of 4 or 5 times higher, with some learners in that kind of K-12 or primary, secondary space doing at least some of their lessons online. That was really driven prior to COVID by people who were looking for some sort of alternative to a physical school. So you had some kind of issue or desire or need to look for an alternative to physical school. So it might have been special educational needs. It could be they had specific talents like tennis proteges or aspiring actors that needed to be on a more flexible schedule. But ultimately, it was always sort of driven out of that kind of need to be out of physical school, looking for an alternative. Actually, online fits that very well. Not always, but in the majority of cases, that was where we were. Still a significant market. But then, of course, last year, there was something fairly significant in the world of online schooling in the COVID pandemic, described by the UN as the largest disruption of education systems in history. And when you look at the statistics they back that up with, it's pretty hard to argue. 1.6 billion learners affected, pretty much every country, 94% of the world's student population being disrupted through COVID, the majority of those as well, switching to some kind of online provision or remote provision during that period. And clearly that is going to have a lasting legacy. Obviously, people on this call, many of you will have experienced dealing with that and having to move yourselves online. And I think what that has probably done to that pitch we were just looking at, sort of 2000 to 2019, is it has put in a kind of step change. And we've moved to a period now where demand for online schooling is not purely based on people who needed to get out of physical school, but actually people who maybe have had some kind of experience of online school and are choosing it more as a positive preference. And I think that's one of the most interesting things of the pandemic, is that actually, although I think for a lot of us it's been a very tough time moving that learning online, for some learners have actually really benefited from that. And again, I wanted to ask yourselves, put a second question out there, as to how many of your students at schools that you work at do you feel have actually benefited from being at home for a period? So that could be they're happier, their well-being is improved, that their performance is improved, or both. So if you were to put in a kind of percentage out of 100, perhaps you teach 100 people, perhaps you don't. But yeah, if you could just put a percentage in the chat, that would be really useful. So seeing sort of 10, 60, 15, 5, again, a really interesting range. To have a 0. Actually, some very high numbers in there, which I'm actually quite surprised at, as well as some of the lower ones. I think the key point here is that it's not sort of none, is it? It's not kind of 1 or 2%. And if I were to bring up that, although the United States has the most developed online school market in the world, it's still, I think, slightly under 1% of pupils in the US that are learning online. And you then compare that to the percentages we're seeing in that, which I'm finding very hard to do a mean of because they are very, very varied, but I would say it's definitely over 10%. That's already a tenfold increase in the number of students for whom this could be appropriate for. And there's been some really interesting research done as well over the last year that just highlights some of these trends. So in the UK, research that was done through the lockdown period last year found that actually students, and this is sort of lower secondary going into GCSE age students, that their anxiety had dropped almost 10% during that period. Particularly when you consider that's with the added stress of a global pandemic to consider in the early stages of that is particularly surprising. Also found that well-being, although overall went up a little bit, but not enough to be sort of significant on this WEM, WBS scale, which is a sort of scale of well-being. Those who had low well-being before the pandemic actually did increase quite dramatically. That lowest 15% went up almost 10 points on that scale, where 3 points is considered to be a significant shift. And probably the most surprising at all, actually, is that there was a 10% increase in the connectedness students felt with their school, despite not being physically connected to it at all. And that was really driven actually out of sort of the connection students felt with their individual teachers and that added kind of respect that they felt that they were getting from that setup. They perhaps felt less marginalized in an online classroom where everyone kind of gets an equal space on the screen. So some really interesting results there. And then more recently as well, we've seen research out of the ISC suggesting that 84% of the parents think having an online learning provision is important or very important when choosing their school. And indeed, just a couple of weeks ago, a piece of research that we've done in the USA suggesting that the ideal vision of American parents is child's education. 43% said either fully online or a hybrid model. Almost as many who said go back to how it was, fully traditional bricks and mortar. So there's clearly not just that trend being seen within the students, but actually really passing through to parents now, showing some active preference for online learning, and that clearly has a growing role. So just to sum up that context, online schooling, it's not a new thing. It was already a rapidly growing space before COVID-19. That growth was originally driven by the alternative, sort of the need for an alternative for particular types of students. We are seeing bearing out now as we come out of COVID, touching wood, is actually a broader appeal, a wider appeal, and an appeal that probably will apply to the majority of schools in at least some way, shape or form. And so I think this session hopefully will be very relevant to all of you on the call today. So with that said, the main thrust of this presentation is to talk about what we can actually do for you in this space and what our online school services are. And I think to do that, it is again useful to put it a little bit in context. We weren't quite the first school, but we were right there at the beginning back in 2001 with our first online school, which was Connections Academy, still running to this day in the United States. There was also then launched the international version of that, which has later been rebranded to Pearson Online Academy, offering US curriculum around the globe and indeed to private students in the United States. We also have supported Harrow School to get their online school up and running, which took its first cohort at the end of September last year. And then this year, we are welcoming our first cohort to the Pearson Online Academy UK international curriculum, offering international GCSEs and international A-levels for the first time. So we have this sort of portfolio of online schools that we either run or support. And our services are derived from those 4 schools, and that they all have certain things in common. So the Pearson Learning Platform is the same across all 4 of those schools, and it's been developed over 20 years, starting with Connections up to where we are today. There is also a content catalogue that is increasingly growing from those 4 schools as well, where we're able to pick out courses that we have there and apply them into our services. And indeed, although we can't use all of those teachers, Harrow being the obvious example in there, we do have a growing pool of Pearson online teachers, highly trained professionals who we can also draw on when providing our services. And our services effectively fall into those 3 categories: platform, content, and teachers. And I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about each of those today, and how you can pick out sort of bits from that provision to help yourselves to go online. And when doing so, there are a number of options. And I think that the sort of focus up until this point has been very much on full-time online schooling in my presentation, But that's not the only option. There are obviously a number of ways in which online school services can be used. So to put a few out there, we could look at extending the reach of the school so that you can either expand your capacity through online or reach students that are not necessarily in your locality. You could expand your portfolio, bringing in new subjects that you don't currently offer, maybe having some online subjects. You could also do a dual pathway, offering some subjects online and offline, or possibly being in a position where you have an oversubscribed subject, enabling that to have as many students on it as you want by having an online and an offline element to it. There is the sort of what I find one of the most interesting options, actually, the idea of kind of enriching your offering, really going down that hybrid model and saying, okay, if there are great advantages to online learning and to offline learning, how can we combine the kind of best of both and make a really premium education experience? Again, our services could be used as a basis for something like that. And I think as a whole, it's worth pointing out, these are just some of the ideas. Really bringing online schooling into your school is kind of like adding a new dimension to the learning that you can provide. It gives you that option to really go into whole new spaces and really innovate and do things differently. And I think it's a really exciting opportunity to look at new ways of learning. And of course, ensuring against risks. Can't really get through any presentation these days without mentioning pandemics and contingency plans. Obviously, we hope we are entering the sort of final phases of our existing pandemic, but that's by no means certain, nor is it certain that there won't be future issues for which we will have to again close schools. So having that contingency plan in place by having an online offer that means you can sort of seamlessly move in and out of online and offline is again another great appeal to bringing online schooling into your school. So one last question for you before we move into a bit of a demo around the platform and show you what it is we have. So we're going to do a poll now around how you are considering using online services at your school. So this should just pop up on your screen in a moment. I'd love to hear from you which of these options you think is the most appealing for you. Are you looking at creating a full-time online school? Are you considering just adding a few subjects or augmenting your existing offer? Are you looking at that new blended learning model and a new way of learning within your school? Is the dual pathway, having the same subject but having an online and a physical route of interest? Do you want to increase the capacity of your school and effectively using online space to do that? Or is it that contingency plan that's really most important to you? So just give you a moment And great to see that all of those options are of interest. Apologies, there wasn't an all of the above option. If you sort of pick, I suppose, the one that's of the most interest, that'd be fantastic. Just to give us a sense of kind of where people are coming from, and obviously this is quite a new offering within Pearson, so we are always developing that, and we will obviously be looking for feedback from yourselves around which direction we should take that in. Okay, so hopefully the results are coming up on the screen to you. Quite interesting. So new blended learning model has definitely won that poll with 40%, but significant interest in fully online and dual pathway as well, a little bit less on the offering new subjects or increasing capacity, which is very interesting. Thank you. Okay. All right. So I've been trailing our services for a while. So as I mentioned, these are the three elements, the platform, the catalog, and the teachers. I'm going to cover those first two largely together through a demo of our existing site, and then talk a little bit about the Pearson teachers and the options we have there as well. So let's jump into the demo. So this is the login page. Hopefully you can see that. If that's not showing up, someone stick it into the chat. You can't see it, but I believe that it should be showing now. So this should be the home page for a student to log in. So I'm just going to click on log in here. And this loads up the homepage for our fictitious student Fatima. And you can see that Fatima here is enrolled in 4 A-levels: chemistry, economics, maths, and physics. If I were to click into each of those, that's how you get into the content. That's obviously how a typical student is likely to engage, and it provides that very direct access to the learning they need to do. But before I dive into those and show you a bit of that, just to highlight some of the features of the site. So we're in the courses tab right now. If I were to go over to the to-do list, you can see all of the tasks that have been assigned by teachers to Fatima that are either overdue or coming up. So you can see there's live lessons in here that they need to be attending. There is homework or particular items that have been assigned. There are pieces of content within the platform. This is obviously all made up for a demo. It would look quite different with an actual teacher, but it's just to demonstrate that they can move into this to-do list function. If they wanted to, could sort of click their way through some of these items and work their way through it that way. There is also an activity stream, which just shows what they've done most recently, whether they've had any scores back from teachers for their online learning. And then if I go into this hamburger menu on the left, there's a few more options and things they can look at. So they could go into their calendar and instead take a look at their week's worth or the day's worth of lessons and activities. So this would show both live lessons and also any tasks they've been assigned. This calendar can be fully synced up with Google or Microsoft applications. So it's fully integrated from that sense. And just gives the student then an overview, a different way again of looking at their same workload. And one of the features of this platform is obviously it has been developed over a number of years. So we've had students and teachers that want to see things slightly differently, and the platform generally shows you that information in both modes so that it's intuitive for different people who have different intuitions. And if we go over to the grade book from that menu as well, we can also see just an overview of their performance to date. So we've not done anything on the chemistry and physics pieces in this demo, but for economics and maths, you can see their progress across all activities, reaching around a third, their progress in just the gradable activities as well. So that's lagging a little bit behind, particularly in economics. There might be a question there as to whether some of those assessments need to be caught up on. You can also see what their score is in assessed activities. So you can see that for both economics and maths, they are performing reasonably well, but notably better in maths. Well, that's up at 87% versus economics down at 72%. So it gives a really useful snapshot of how well they're doing and the pace at which they're progressing. And there's also this self-assessment tool, which actually teachers have found very useful within our platform. So if I click into this for economics, this is a student's own self-reported levels of understanding, interest and effort. So we can see for economics, their understanding, they feel quite competent in, but their interest and their effort is waning a little. They're down on okay. They could go lower, it could be down to sort of outright bored, but it could also be significantly higher. So that potentially is a flag to the teacher, particularly when we're seeing that they're doing well in other subjects, that there's a bit of an issue with engagement around economics, and to see if there's a way to sort of spark that interest for Fatima. Maths, by contrast, you can see there's a lot of interest there, decent level of understanding, decent level of effort, which is probably fueling these good results. Two things do work together to have that sort of data that the platform churns out next to some more qualitative information directly from the student. And as I say, teachers have found that very useful and indeed often encourage their students to come up with weekly updates on that, so they have that metric when they're looking at student performance. Okay, so let's have a look at some content. I'm going to go into economics because I think that's probably the most accessible to people who are not overly confident with the science and maths. So if we go into economics, the first thing you see is this kind of free range piece for the teacher to fill in. So they have a sort of teacher homepage in here. So as you can see on this example, we've put in things like live lessons, upcoming deadlines, mock exams, etc. But this could be as long as this, or it could be shorter. It could literally just have a couple of links to contact the teacher. And indeed at the bottom here, you can see that they've got links for booking in extra time with the teachers. Going to touch a little bit more as to what our teachers do later in the presentation. But we do have this option to book in a little bit of extra office time outside of the sort of standard lesson schedule within our schools, so that students who are struggling or who just want a bit of clarification on something can get it. And then down at the bottom, we then have the topics and all the content for them to work through. So in this demo, we only have a couple of topics here. For the full A-level, there would be all of the topics of the A-level down there. They'd obviously be guided by their teacher as to what to complete each week, and they would typically obviously work through that in order. So they go into topic 1, you can then see there's a range of lessons within topic 1, each covering a different part of the specification. And all of these lessons combined across all the topics will actually cover the complete content for an international GCSE or an international A-level. So every point of the specification is covered in this online content. And let's have a look at one. So I think we would all love to learn a bit about financial markets. So why don't we go in there? The first thing I just want to highlight is the structure of this content, which is consistent across all of the lessons. It starts off by outlining what it is students need to learn for that lesson, the lesson objectives. There's then a getting started or sort of spark activity. And this can be used to bring in prior knowledge. So if this financial markets section relies a little bit on what they've learned in lessons or in production possibility frontiers, getting started could be a place just to ask a couple of questions to remind them of that knowledge before they go into the next section, or it could just be a general way of sparking a bit of interest. The core of the lesson then is split into 2 bits of core content, which are sort of bite-sized chunks of information that are then followed up by activities where they have to put that concept they've just learned into practice. They then build on it with a second concept and then put that into practice. Rounding off the lesson, there would be a quick check where they go through all of the learning for that lesson and just check their knowledge to make sure they've understood what they've been through. And that sort of consistent narrative structure helps the learners to remain engaged with it. So I'm going to click through and quickly go through one of these lessons just to show you what's in there. So you can see for this one, this potentially is literally from some of the language and specification, a few definitions there as well, just outlining what the lesson is about. We then go into the getting started second part of the lesson. So it looks as if this again is actually drawing on some prior learning from the money section, asking them to go through an activity here just to get them started. I'm not going to sort of check any of these. I'll just click through a few at random. There we go, got one right. And onwards we move. So a core content section looks a bit like this. So there is obviously some content here for students to go through, but it's been designed in a way that is supposed to bring out sort of active engagement of the learner. So they're not just having to read their way through it. There are bits like this where you'd be clicking in, therefore having to kind of actively interact with the page to get through all of that content to try and keep them engaged. Presentationally, obviously, you'd be familiar with this from other Pearson resources designed to spark interest, but importantly, not too much here. This obviously A-level economics, GCSE would be a little bit shorter, and they would work through that. They would then go on to an activity that just checks their understanding of that. It's more of a formative assessment to really put what they've just learned into practice. So obviously, having not read through any of that, I'm not even going to attempt this, but you can see there's sort of drop-down menus here, word banks. In maths, obviously, they've been used straight numerical answers, multiple choice, etc. So all of that would then be auto-marked by the system. And fed back to the teacher. So none of this involves or requires a teacher to get involved and mark all of these pieces because they all have sort of standard answers. We then move on to the second piece of core content. This then further as financial markets builds on that first concept. Again, we're having to sort of click into information that's there. And then this one rounds up as well with a video for students to go through. And there will be videos dotted around. There'll be other interactive tools in there as well. So engagement isn't just a case of how we present the information and making sure that a learner is having to kind of actively click their way through. There are also tools in there to sort of actively spark their engagement, such as videos or flip charts and so on. Flip cards, sorry. Okay, that would then follow up with a second activity, much the same as the first, with drop downs and word banks and so on, or multiple choices. Maybe have a go at this one. Let's say those ones. And you can check your answer at any point. This is obviously not a summative assessment. This would get fed through to the teacher, but typically not weighted into that overall score that we've seen. It's more a check of just sort of through it. The idea is obviously if the student doesn't understand this, they should be going back and trying to re-understand it. So you get little feedback boxes and that sort of thing as well, where they're getting it wrong. If I go on to the quick check, that is slightly more formal, and that there is a sort of a start and retake, and the teacher can set how many times they want a student to be allowed to retake it. They can also decide within that if they want to give them an extra choice. And this similar sort of format, but a little bit more formal, sort of 5 questions through here. So there's a word bank there, so I'll skip over that one, but if I put in some answers to some of these other ones, let's see what we get. So we've got the first one right, so obviously not the second one, having not put an answer through. Potentially half marks there, nothing on this one. So that's effectively how it works. So we're getting 20% for that submission. That grade is going to go to the teacher. The teacher will also see how much time we spent on this assessment. So they'd fairly quickly pick up that we went through it in about 10 seconds. They could also click through the actual answers to see that I didn't even answer number 2. And they could also see how long we spent on the content that preceded it, which again was very, very little. So it'd be fairly clear to a teacher looking into that, they've got 20%, but it's because they've really not engaged with this lesson at all. We need to speak to them about going back through that lesson and trying it again. Okay, so I'm going to jump out of that now and go back into the presentation at this point. Hopefully that gives you a good sort of snapshot overview of how content on our platform works. Obviously, doesn't have to be the last conversation, and if you do want to engage with us further, there'll be options to do that at the end. So just do that. Okay. So I think in summary with our platform, what I'd say about it is that it's an intuitive setup that's been refined over 20 years. It does what it needs to do, and it does it that way because it's ultimately been refined over those number of years. And in a market where there are obviously a lot of new starters coming in, a lot of people developing platforms right now, or over the last year or so, there's a real edge here, and this has been built with a lot of experience working with students and teachers to make sure that it is intuitive for a range of different people. So what subjects do we offer? So I showed a few of the A levels there, the chemistry, physics and economics. We also, of course, have biology, and we do have further maths at an international A level. Economics is shown, so there's a sort of range of 6 there. For international GCSE, we have really kept similar subjects. So we have 3 sciences, maths, and then business, kind of leading through to economics. But we also have English language and literature and computer science for international GCSE. This is very much our sort of starter suite for international GCSE and international A-level. We will be looking to add more subjects from September next year, and we'll be looking to engage with people like yourselves to find out what subjects would be of most benefit. And obviously that depends on what you're planning to do with it and the kind of appeal of different angles on online learning. But for now, these will all be available from September of this year. And just briefly to mention as well that obviously we do have a significant offer on US curriculum, where we can offer basically a full catalogue across the whole of K-12, science, maths, English, social studies, a range of electives and AP courses are also potentially available. The focus of this presentation has been very much UK, so I'm not going to dig into that in any great detail. But if you are interested in US, do get in touch because there's a lot more to talk about on that front. So teaching. So we are obviously hiring Pearson teachers right now for the Pearson Online Academy UK version. The teachers we are hiring this year will all be UK qualified teachers. We'll be opening that out to the international market as well from this year, where we look for equivalent levels of qualification. And we'll also be doing our flagship training program with teachers as well, the Master Teacher Free, actually, that we based on Master Trainer Free, which we've been developing over a number of years around online and remote learning practice. We are going to be developing a specific version of that for schools, which will also be available for other teachers to go through, but all of our teachers will have gone through that. And what our teachers do within the school and how that model kind of pieces together is a little bit different from a traditional school. Obviously, we are looking at a new mode of learning. We are looking at something that is trying to achieve the same learning outcomes, but doing it through quite a different medium in online versus a physical school. So we do use a different model. We call it the learning triad. So in that learning triad, you have the student obviously at the heart, who is there to learn and to explore and create. But there are 3 points around them that help them to do that. One of which we've just been looking at effectively is the content within the platform, and that performs a bigger role than traditionally, say, resources and textbooks and things would have done within a school. It is sort of a replacement of that, but it's so much more than that. Obviously, as you've seen from those lessons, those aren't just pieces of content. There is instructional intelligence in there. There is active engagement. There is the whole specification in there that students can work through and be graded. So there is a sort of whole area there that is around informing and instructing. And if the content is doing that, what is the teacher doing? Well, the teacher is doing what the teachers actually do best. And when we really look at this model as a way of highlighting the teacher's highest points of value when they're having those really rich learning interactions with their students, where they're personalizing learning. So the lessons they would conduct wouldn't necessarily have to cover any particular content from a week, but they can then go and reinforce, they can apply, they can get people together to do work in groups, they can intervene if someone is struggling, they can stretch the students that found that particular piece easy. So they're really there in their sort of best position to really use their expertise to personalize learning for each of their learners. And they would do some marking as well. So I showed you some of the assessments, the quick check and so on. All of that is auto marked, but that would build up towards end of topic tests that are more like sort of miniature mock exams on each of the topics and full mocks at the end of each year. There is also 3 weeks of revision, which has various exam practice things in there. And anything that has that kind of longer written answer is still going to be going through the teacher to mark. There's also the option for teachers within that form to set and assign tasks. And again, when they do that, they can do that from anything around the world. They can take a particular topic that is prevalent right now, create a piece of homework off that, obviously the platform doesn't know how to mark that. They're going to be marking that themselves. So they will still have some role in marking, but not the level of perhaps slightly more monotonous marking that teachers traditionally have to go through. So it really liberates the teacher from some of those more routine activities to really focus on the areas where they can add really high value. And within our schools, we also have a third role here, the learning coach, who is to support the student, to coach the student, to look after their well-being, to have that holistic view of them, to do things like careers guidance, help them with university application, etc. So it's kind of there as their individual champion within the school, making sure that they are engaging and doing well, and also looking into things like their extracurricular activities, what they're doing outside of school, and inside school, then extracurricular. So those three together support the teacher, the student to learn. To focus a little bit more on the teacher, so within International GCSE, they would be doing one live lesson a week per International GCSE. There would be 2 of the lessons which we just saw on the demo that would go with that. So for business studies, they might be doing a couple of lessons around marketing or HR or whatever. And there would then be a live lesson that week. The teacher can have a look at how they've done in those sessions, what interactions they've had with students that week, and tailor their lesson around that, or potentially have a particular style of interactive or really fun way of looking at that content again to enrich their understanding that they know they're going to use in that particular week. For International A-Level, those quantities effectively double up or slightly more than double up. So there'd be 2 live lessons per week, and there would be 5 of those online lessons we were just looking at that a student would work their way through. So it's roughly a sort of 2/3 to 70/30 ratio between the live interactions and the online lessons. They would, in addition to that, be doing some individual one-to-one catch-ups with learners or potentially small groups. Those could be initiated by the learner where they're struggling in a particular area and reach out proactively themselves for help, or they could be initiated by the teacher where they can see that a student or a small group of students are particularly struggling with a certain concept, and they think it's best to sort of take them out into a smaller group for 15 minutes, half an hour, and really drill into one particular area to help them get past that particular barrier. So this is one of our live lessons. This is actually an example from Harrow School online. I'm just going to play this in a moment. But just before I do, to highlight the platform that we're using for this is Adobe Connect. So the learning platform that I showed doesn't have a video conferencing tool built into it, but it is compatible with any others. So you can use Zoom, Google, Microsoft, Adobe Connect. And obviously this is a technology where there is a lot of competition and a lot of rising and falling, and then new offers coming out all the time. So we wanted to have our platform to be able to work with things that the schools are already using, but also the kind of best and latest video conferencing tools available, and that's something we're regularly reviewing. But for the moment, we feel Adobe Connect is the best, and that's because, as you can see in this particular lesson, you've got the teacher here, visible at all times. You've got a free chat for students to interact and pose questions to the teacher. You have an active question that he is asking his students to fill in, so that would be a poll, and those results would be showable on Adobe Connect, and you've got the presentation material in the middle here. And that's not a set structure either. As you'll see in the demo, there are other ways of lining this up, but it gives you a lot of powerful tools to really present in an engaging manner. So just going to fire this up now, and hopefully you will be able to hear it. If not, give me a shout in the chat and I'll check the settings. Okay, that should be sorted now. So I'll just rewind that. Again, shout if you can't hear it, but that should now work.
Okay, good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Shields and I'm the economics teacher at Harrow School Online. Now I know that none of you have got any previous economics experience at all. So this is going to be very much a new subject for you. So there's no prior knowledge that I can mine in my lesson. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to look at something called game show economics. And I think we all like game shows. Well, I certainly do. So the best way to get this started is to actually get you involved in a few games. So you'll see on the next screen that we've got 3 brain teasers, 3 visual illusions for you to try and tackle. Now, what I would like you to do is to put your answer into each of the polls. The first 2 questions you can select using the radio buttons on the far right hand side, and then the third question you can type an answer in.
Okay, so I mean, apologies, that top of the video is cut off. Obviously, the students could actually see those 3 brain teasers on there, but it gives you an idea of the way in which you can use sorts of tools and the way in which our teachers would use these tools to really bring those live lessons to life. And we're not simply talking about a kind of traditional Zoom call, but something a bit richer than that.
Okay.
There is also the option of professional development. So if you're looking at using your own teachers and not looking at sort of outsourcing those or working with Pearson to provide teachers, we can still provide training for your teachers. So we have 2 courses for that, Teaching for Impact and Master Trainer Free, or will soon become Master Teacher Free. That's currently in development. So Teaching for Impact is a set of modules that we've developed from our online schools over the 20 years of experience we've had there to bring together kind of 12 modules that really go through all the best practice for getting started right through to applying best practice online teaching. That's only £100 per teacher to get access to that, and it's actually delivered through the platform that I was showing you today. So just give access to the content within there for teachers to work through in their own time. Master Teacher Free will then use similar content, but also provide a series of live 3-hour sessions, with an expert facilitator, culminating in a practical that is certificated by Pearson. That's around £4,500 for a group of up to 15. So it is a slightly different model, but also more expensive per participant, of course, because it is that slightly richer level, but 2 good options that you could look at if you are looking at upskilling your staff for online teaching. So I think just to sort of summarize on the teaching element, there is always this sort of fear when you talk about technology that we're trying to replace the human element, and obviously that's present in every area, and it does come up at times in teaching, but our online model is definitely not an attempt to replace teachers. It's a way of trying to make them more impactful. And actually the way in which our platform takes away some of those more routine activities and enables them to spend more time on the things that we know teachers do best and that only teachers can do is one of the great strengths of this system of online learning. So I've also talked through the different elements of our offer. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of the sort of pricing and the system from which it could be purchased. So as I've touched on, we have platform content and teachers that we can provide, or we can provide professional development instead of teachers, or indeed if you feel you're fully trained at neither, but there would always be this platform and content piece that we would have to offer. You could then bring that into your school either with your own teachers if you weren't using the Pearson ones, but then also a sort of things that really build up a distinctive character of your school. So there is the student well-being side, so that learning coach piece that I mentioned, that's not something that we provide as part of our services. That is something that we assume you at your schools will be able to do, either whether that's a fully online school that you'd be providing that provision, or if you're putting something in and alongside a physical school, then naturally that's something you're likely to already have a good handle on. Also things like extracurricular leadership, obviously the brand of your school and the marketing would remain with yourselves. So those services would really underpin your efforts to go online, but we would also want to keep the distinctive character of your school and not simply have everyone providing Pearson platform content and teachers with no distinction between them. Obviously, there needs to be that distinctive element for each school that is retained. So this is the basic pricing model. So if you're looking at content and platform only, it is £99 per international GCSE or £199 for the international A-level, which is obviously a bit more than twice the size. So that would enable Fatima to take one GCSE or one A-level for 1 year. If she were to take a full suite of international GCSEs, 5 or more, or a full suite of international A-levels, 3 or more, that price then gets capped at £449 for Fatima again per year. If we are talking about using Pearson teachers as well, then that price is £699 for an international GCSE, or £1,399, again, doubling up for international A-level. Again, that is for an individual student to take one subject per year. There is the potential, if you have a lot of students available, to do a bulk discount, but what we really wanted to do with this model was to make it accessible to everyone. So if you have one learner that you want to put on one subject, say let's take A-level economics, so you don't offer it at your school, but you have one student who really wants to do it, you can put them on that course and that standard price would apply. And it's a really useful way then of enabling schools that have that sort of lower level of ambition or involvement with this to engage with it, right up to people who actually want to launch a fully online school using a lot of the Pearson services to support that. And indeed, it can also be used as a way to sort of get yourself off the ground, potentially drawing on more Pearson teachers, and then over time, switch more of those over to yourself as well, so that you can get through those sort of early years. It's really a way of sort of bringing the education community together so that we enable everyone to go online. So hopefully there's something in there that appeals to most of you on the call. If you're wondering, does it work? Is it worth the money? We obviously don't have results from our UK side. That is too new. Although we have a cohort that we're working with Harrow on that started last September. We won't know how well they do until next summer, and our international GCSE starts this September. But because we have been operating in the US for a number of years, we do have results from the US, and obviously the learning model is the same, and the platform is the same. So we can draw a good deal of confidence from this. And in the US, we've seen 100% college acceptance rates, so no issue with learners having gone through an online school being viewed in a negative way. And indeed, there's a sort of growing body of thought, actually, that the opposite might again be true, that because those learners are learning a little bit more independently, they are taking a bit more control of their learning, that actually can prepare them quite well for the style of learning they'll have at university. And then the results that our students achieve is consistently above and quite significantly above the US national average on the standardized tests that you typically take at the end of high school, so things like AP, STAT and ACT tests. And then perhaps most importantly of all, the parents are incredibly satisfied, around 95% for a range of factors around their satisfaction with their child education. So we know that this model works. We're very confident that will be applied over to the UK system we're developing. And indeed, some of the things we're doing with our new UK content are actually building on best practice from what we have from the United States as well. So we're very excited to see those results coming in over the next couple of years. What we do have in the meantime on the UK side is some qualitative feedback from students. And again, very, very positive. And interestingly, drawing out some of the elements that maybe people would worry about, things like socializing. The students are actually building some really good friendships through our online schools. They're really enjoying that social environment, as well as developing things like the independent skills that we obviously say that they do, but it's great to hear it from the mouth of the student as well. Okay, so that brings my presentation to an end. We do still have around 10 minutes for questions. I'll be able to hang on for a few extra minutes if there is anything overspilling from that, but I'll hand over to Nick to start firing away on what's come through on the Q&A.
Yes, well, we've had lots of questions, which we thought we might have. Lots of people seem excited by this, and someone saying that they wish they were a student and they could go back to learning this way. So that's a good endorsement. We've got a couple of questions around subject ranges. One about, this is obviously covering a lot of the core subjects, that there is probably a need on some of the additional subjects, some of the creative subjects. Could you give us an update, Chris, on what the plans are for other subject areas?
Sure. So at the moment, our plan is to decide that around kind of June time this year. But what we are going to do for that is actually reach out to everyone who's engaged with us on online schooling over the last few months through things like what we're doing today. So we will be asking you to participate in that actually, and then sending out the survey to everyone on this call in a month or so to see which subjects you would like to see next. It is obviously a new field. We have developed those initial subjects very much around providing a core curriculum for Pearson Online Academy. but we're very keen to hear how international schools and other schools would like to use this, and therefore, which kind of subjects would be the most obvious things to add next. I think the kind of natural evolution from where we are now is to go into things like the humanities and the most popular languages, but possibly this is a different learning mode, as I've said. It could be other subjects that actually stand out more, so we're really keen to hear from yourselves what those subjects should be.
Great. Along the same line, someone's asked about how we deliver practical science elements online.
Indeed. So these are obviously the international specifications, so there isn't a requirement for them to actually perform the practical as part of the external assessment at the end. So what we have done, though, to teach them the core elements of that is to film those assessments being done by students, and we've created this sort of step-by-step series of videos. Ordinarily when I'm demoing, I would actually go through and show that, but obviously we are slightly limited on time today and trying to get around a number of points. But it would just show sort of step one, how you set up the experiment. Then there'd be a question, why have we set it up this way? So keeping that kind of active engagement principle. Each video is sort of 2 minutes long, followed by a question, then another 2 minutes of the video, followed by a question. So they get involved in that process. They see people like themselves doing it to kind of make it more realizable, and then at the end of that, obviously, there's the usual putting it into practice, quick checks, etc., to make sure that they've understood how that experiment would be conducted.
Right. There's a question here about a reader facility for accessibility. Do we have one of those?
I want to say yes, because I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, but you have caught me slightly there as to whether I'm 100% sure. So we'll follow up with a few answers afterwards, and I will double check on that point to make sure there is a reader. I'm pretty sure there is, though.
And there's a question here about the difference between live and online lessons.
Yes, and we do struggle a bit with the terminology. So when I said live and online, by live I mean someone on, like what we're doing right now. That would be a live lesson. The online would be what I was showing in the demo, working through that content. So we actually tend to use the terms synchronous and asynchronous. I'm not sure how widely those are used outside of the halls of sort of Pearson Online Schools development, but that's kind of what we mean. A synchronous lesson, people are both there live on a video conference, and the online lesson was what I was using as a term for sort of the asynchronous piece, where a student is working through that in their own time, but there is a teacher there in the background. It's not sort of completely independent study. They're going to be monitoring results, but also available for questions and things as they work through the course.
Great. There was a question that came through while you were presenting the demonstration on showing the objectives. Just for the group, when we share the email and a recording, we'll give more details about how you can request a demonstration for your own school or for your colleagues. So we'll share that information if there's anything you'd like to see in a bit more detail. There's a question here about plans to have this platform for BTEC, specifically level 7.
Indeed. I mean, we would absolutely love to kind of do it for everything. Obviously, we're having to work through a series of priorities. BTEC has come up as a potential area for this. And I know we already have the kind of HN Online platform for some of the higher level BTECs. It's definitely something in conversations. Unfortunately, probably not going to be seeing it in the next year or two, but maybe further out than that, we might be able to expand this offer into a broader sphere.
Okay. And there's a question here about the lower levels, primary and lower secondary, and the plans for that. So
we are planning to move into lower secondary. It would probably be in 2 September's time, so September 2023. And as such, that plan is fairly sort of light at the moment. It's not a definite plan. That's not a sort of guarantee, but we are thinking of lower secondary and then potentially primary from there. Obviously, what we've tended to hear is more reservations around online schooling the younger you go. In the US, we actually go all the way from kindergarten, but that does rely on heavier levels of parental or some other guardian in the house being involved. So it does have slightly more limited application, I think, for most international schools. But it's something we are definitely going to look at, and lower secondary is firmly on the radar. Right.
Thanks, Chris. There's a question here from a hybrid school, and they have teachers, but they would like to complement and supplement with live lessons and our teachers. Is that possible?
I think that probably is a conversation that might be worth just delving into a bit more. I mean, in principle, I think there probably is something that can be done there, but I'm not entirely sure whether you mean just having the live lessons from the teachers without the content and platform, or whether you're talking about some sort of mix of the two. But, you know, as I said, there's a lot of different applications for this. I'd be more than happy to have a follow-up conversation around specifically what it is that's leaning towards.
Thanks. Naveen also asks if is there a plan for co-teaching with local school teachers? So once again, I'm not sure whether that is about co-teaching or whether using local teachers, but Chris, maybe a quick update on how we recruit.
So we recruit in the same way that we would for any other teacher. Obviously, it's specified as an online thing. We've been advertising in the usual places like the Times Educational Supplement, but obviously looking for people who have more of the digital skills. At the same time, it's not it's something that we feel confident we can teach teachers to do, that we have that expertise in-house to provide professional development. If you're a good teacher in physical school, as long as you're not averse to technology, then you can be developed. You can be provided the training to do online teaching as well. Sure.
So just looking further through the questions, there's one here asking about provisions for English as a second language or additional language.
So at the moment, that's not part of our provision. It was one of the really interesting ones that we looked at. Again, it would be one of those that's on the sort of list of should this be the next subject that we move into. What we do at the moment is we obviously have a minimum English level requirement for those subjects, and what we're looking at with Pearson Online Academy is whether we can provide additional English tutoring if we have students that kind of need that kind of EAL, either summer school or possibly something in their first term to really bolster up English language provision. But there's nothing sort of built into the offer at the moment to address that. But again, we'd be really keen to hear people's thoughts, to see if that is a line that perhaps we should be developing as part of our next set of developments.
Great. Thanks, Chris. We still have some unanswered questions, but we are at time now, so we're going to have to draw the webinar to a close. But thank you, everybody, for your great questions. We will get them answered, and we will follow up with the recording and answer those questions as part of that follow-up. There'll be more to come. This is the first webinar. We really welcome your feedback and look forward to carrying on the conversation. And thank you very much for joining this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.